Hi, everybody. I'm really happy to be able to share with you the first part of my interview with Reverend Dr. Yohanna Katanacho, the Academic Dean of Nazareth Evangelical College in Nazareth, Israel. Before we begin, however, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, to ring the bell so that you can be notified when videos like this appear in the future, and please be sure to share this interview on social media. I want to welcome everybody who is watching this interview. It's my pleasure to have with me the Reverend Dr. Yohanna Katanacho, who is the Academic Dean at Nazareth Evangelical College. He is a Palestinian Israeli evangelical who has studied at Bethlehem University, where he earned a Bachelor of Science, Wheaton College, where he earned a Master of Arts, and Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, where he earned a Master of Divinity and a PhD. He's also the author of The Land of Christ, A Palestinian Cry, published in 2013, Praying Through the Psalms, published in 2018, and Reading the Gospel of John Through Palestinian Eyes, published in 2020, which is going to be the principal focus of our talk today. So, Reverend Dr. Katanacho, I want to welcome you and thank you for making the time to be here to talk about your work and your book with us.
It is my pleasure to be with you. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, before we get started talking about your book on the Gospel of John, Reading the Gospel of John Through Palestinian Eyes, please tell the audience a little bit about yourself. So I read your bio, a short bio there. You're a Palestinian Israeli evangelical. It's pretty safe to assume that there are very few Americans who actually know Palestinian Israeli evangelicals. Talk to us about what that means, your experience growing up, the things that shaped you, and some of those important experiences that have made you into who you are today.
Sure. Thank you, Chris. Um, First of all, people always have assumptions, and labels carry a lot of sometimes biases, assumptions, threats sometimes to certain people. Um, I live in a context where every definition of who I am creates some form of enmity. so, so the thing is, I just want to at least state it in a very simple way. Culturally and historically, I am a Palestinian. The way I eat, the way I dance, the way the way we go to funerals, to weddings, we eat hummus, we eat falafel. We have, this is our Palestinian culture. So I am Palestinian. Historically, I am also Palestinian. My historical roots, the way I'm connected to the land, my language, my accent, and these are not necessarily political. It's just a matter of my identity, my cultural and historical identity. In terms of citizenship, I have an Israeli passport, so I am an Israeli citizen. I can vote, I can move in the country, I shape some of the political realities within the country through voting and through other means. And my neighbors are Jews. I interact with them. I speak Hebrew, I speak Arabic, and I speak English, obviously. So these are some of the characteristics of my identity as an Israeli. Also, there is an Israeli culture. So I am a bicultural by nature. On the one hand, I'm Palestinian. On the other hand, I'm Israeli as well. So I am combining these two things. Again, that's not necessarily political, but it has political implications in terms of at least identity, travel, living, taxes, all of these issues. In terms of my religious identity, I am an evangelical by choice, that I have chosen to follow the evangelical faith. And basically what this means for me, because also this label has so many different meanings all over the world, it basically means that I'm committed to a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, and that I take the Bible both testaments, Old and New Testament, seriously in terms of shaping my identity, the identity of my community, and the way I follow Jesus Christ. So this is, in a nutshell, these identities. I just want to add that sometimes these identities are in conflict with each other. My Palestinian identity with my Israeli identity, my even evangelical identity. So I have to be a peacemaker and to work continually on uh, defining who I am in relation to my Lord. So my identity is dynamic, is not static. So it's not like sometimes when I go to an Israeli, for example, airport, I am basically an Israeli because that's what I have. I have an Israeli passport. But when I go, for example, to Egypt and I meet some fellow Arabs there, I'm basically a Palestinian because that's basically the language and the food and the way to connect and build bridges. So it is really confusing how to define myself, but it is static. It's not static, it's dynamic depending on the situation. Now, at the core of my identities, I want to bring Christ to all of my identities and in a way to sanctify these identities because none of them are sinful in essence. That means that the identity can be sanctified but not rejected. Right. So it's not like I want to reject my Israeli identity or reject my Palestinian identity or reject my evangelical identity. I want it to be shaped in a way that pleases my Lord. Sorry, this is a long answer to a simple question. All over the world, you can easily define who you are, but here it's a little bit more complex.
Well, it's actually very helpful from my perspective because as I hear you talking, I'm thinking back to some passages in the New Testament where Jesus and Paul, for instance, are living biculturally. You know, when Jesus is presented with a coin and is asked about the question of taxes, there's an issue of biculturalism there that he has to address and navigate very carefully. Paul, using his Roman citizenship, for instance, that directly impacted his ministry in many ways, especially at the end by appealing unto Caesar and dealing with that conflict in Jerusalem that way. So do you think you look at certain passages in the New Testament differently than perhaps some other believers around the world because of your experience living in two cultures simultaneously?
Absolutely, absolutely. In my book, we might come to this later in the Gospel of John. I at least I feel and I see there are some evidence that will help me to argue that John is experiencing an identity question. Is experiencing some struggle with the identity and with the community as well later, the followers of Jesus. The followers of Jesus come from a Jewish background. Now, they are followers of Jesus, and the majority, it seems that the majority have not accepted the interpretation that focuses on Jesus as the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecies. And so they are experiencing a conflict between their Jewish identity and their new identity in Christ. And their new identity in Christ, it's opening up to include, for example, nations that didn't come from Jewish background. And so they have to restructure their social relationships. They have to restructure their expectations. They have to restructure their commitments and their loyalties. And so it is difficult and dynamic, that reshaping their identity. This is where I see a lot of the I am saying in the Gospel of John reflecting actually issues related to identity. So in addition to that, I would I would see that in the Gospel of John, we see followers of Jesus Christ living as a minority among a Jewish majority. And so this reality actually does not exist any other place in the world except in Israel today, where we as followers of Christ in Israel are a minority among a Jewish majority.
Yep.
I mean, I'm not sure if New York will qualify, but I would say Israel is clearly a place where this happens, where you have a Christian minority living among a Jewish majority, and living in the same land in which Christ lived. These are unique components that basically create a theological context in which we interact with the text from a social dimension and context that is unique and similar to the context in the Gospel of John.
Well, if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, to ring the bell so that you can be notified when videos like this appear in the future. And please be sure to share this YouTube video on social media. Thanks so much, everybody. See you next time.